I'm Jinsey Roman, Senior Analyst at Galaxy Technologies. Last month, our VP of Strategy, Warren Ashby, pulled me from the quarterly board presentation 48 hours before showtime. His exact words? "You make others uncomfortable with your precision. We need someone who communicates with more warmth." I smiled, nodded, walked back to my desk. Here's what Warren didn't know: I'd spent 3 months building that presentation's financial model. Every projection, every risk assessment, every contingency scenario came from my analysis. 96 hours of modeling work, including weekends when the office was empty except for me and the cleaning crew. I'd pulled data from 17 different sources, reconciled conflicting numbers from 3 departments, and built a model so robust it could withstand any question the board might throw at it. The deck looked pretty, sure, but the engine underneath? That was mine. Every formula, every assumption, every footnote explaining why certain numbers were conservative and others aggressive, all of it came from my keyboard at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep because I'd spotted a discrepancy in the customer retention data. Warren handed my slot to Colton Pierce, his golden boy who'd been with Galaxy for 8 months. Colton had charm, an MBA from somewhere impressive, and absolutely zero understanding of our Q4 data. But he had warmth, apparently. He smiled at people in meetings. He made small talk about golf. He never questioned Warren's strategic instincts, which I suspect was his most valuable quality. I wasn't angry. I was curious. Curious about what would happen when charm met complexity. Let me back up and give you context about Galaxy Technologies and how I ended up in Warren's crosshairs. Galaxy is a mid-sized tech company specializing in enterprise software solutions. We're not a household name, but we have solid contracts with Fortune 500 clients and we've been profitable for 6 consecutive years. The kind of company that won't make you rich overnight but offers stability and decent benefits. I joined Galaxy 4 years ago as a junior analyst. I'm good with numbers the way some people are good with languages. Patterns emerge for me that others miss. Give me a spreadsheet and 3 hours, and I'll find the story the data is trying to tell you. Warren joined 2 years ago from a consulting firm, brought in to elevate our strategic thinking after our previous VP retired. He was all buzzwords and frameworks. Everything was about synergies and strategic alignment and optimizing stakeholder value. Not wrong, exactly, just hollow. Like a beautifully wrapped gift box with nothing inside. We clashed from the start, though he probably didn't notice at first. I'd attend strategy meetings and ask questions about implementation. He'd present grand visions, and I'd ask about resource allocation. He'd propose aggressive growth targets, and I'd run the numbers to see if they were feasible. "You're very detail-oriented," he told me once, in a tone that suggested this was not a compliment. "Someone has to be," I replied. The tension built slowly. He started excluding me from certain meetings. My project assignments shifted from strategic work to analytical support, code 4, do the math while we make the decisions. I kept my head down, did excellent work, and documented everything meticulously. Then came the Q4 board presentation opportunity. In August, Warren announced that the board wanted a comprehensive strategic proposal for expanding into the mid-market segment. New customer tier, adjusted pricing, modified service offerings, a genuine strategic shift that could reshape Galaxy's revenue structure. "Jinsey, I need financial modeling for this," Warren said in our team meeting. "Revenue projections, cost analysis, ROI scenarios. Think you can handle it?" Think I could handle it? I'd been waiting for exactly this kind of project. I spent September buried in data. I interviewed sales leaders about customer acquisition patterns. I analyzed churn rates across different customer segments. I built Monte Carlo simulations to model various market conditions. I created sensitivity tables showing how the projections would shift if any of our key assumptions changed by even 5%. The model I built wasn't just a spreadsheet, it was a decision-making engine. You could adjust any variable and watch the implications cascade through the entire financial picture. Conservative market adoption? Here's what happens. Aggressive pricing strategy? Here are the trade-offs. Economic downturn? These are our downside protections. I presented the initial findings to Warren in late September. His eyes glazed over approximately 4 minutes into my explanation of the methodology. "This is great, Jinsey. Really thorough. Can you summarize the key takeaways in a slide or two? I created an executive summary. Clean, simple, highlighting the most probable scenario, 18% revenue growth over 2 quarters, manageable risk profile, solid returns. Perfect, Warren said. This is exactly what the board needs to see. You'll present this at the October board meeting. It'll be great exposure for you. I started preparing. I rehearsed my talking points. I anticipated questions. I knew that board intimately, Diane Whitmore's background in private equity, Harold Yates's obsession with operational efficiency, Margaret Sullivan's focus on competitive positioning. I crafted explanations that would resonate with each of them. Then, 48 hours before the presentation, Warren called me into his office. Change of plans, he said, not meeting my eyes. Colton's going to present the strategic proposal. I felt like I'd been punched. I built that model. And it's excellent work. Really excellent. But Colton has a better presentation style. He connects with people. You know how you can be sometimes, very intense, very focused on the numbers. The board needs to feel excited about this strategy, not overwhelmed by data. The data is the strategy, I said carefully. Sure. But we need someone who can sell the vision. Colton's great at that. You understand, right? It's not personal. It was absolutely personal. But arguing wouldn't change his mind. When do I brief Colton on the model? I asked. I'll walk him through the key points. You just make sure the deck is polished. Maybe create some backup slides in case there are detailed questions. I went back to my desk, hands shaking slightly. Not from anger, from the sudden clarity of understanding. Warren hadn't excluded me because Colton was better. He'd excluded me because I made him look bad by comparison. My precision highlighted his superficiality. My questions revealed the gaps in his strategic thinking. This wasn't about presentation style. This was about control. Update 1, the enemy's enemy. 2 days after Warren benched me, I got a Slack message from Veronica Huang, VP of Operations. Coffee? Have something to discuss. Veronica was an interesting figure at Galaxy. She'd been with the company for 8 years, survived 3 rounds of restructuring, and had a reputation for being simultaneously brilliant and ruthless. She and Warren had been feuding since the spring reorganization, when Warren's strategy team absorbed some of operations planning responsibilities. I'd watched their conflicts play out in executive meetings, thinly veiled disagreements about resource allocation, competing visions for Galaxy's direction, the subtle art of corporate warfare where every email CC list was a tactical decision. We met at the coffee shop across from Galaxy's headquarters. Veronica ordered an espresso, double shot. I got tea. I heard what happened with the board presentation, she said, stirring sugar into her cup. That's unfortunate. It's his call, I replied neutrally. Never complain up or sideways, my father taught me that. Of course. She paused, studying me. I'm curious, though. You built the financial model for that presentation, didn't you? The mid-market expansion analysis? I confirmed. I've seen your work. You're thorough. Probably the most analytically rigorous person on Warren's team, which is saying something because his team is generally quite good. Thank you. And Colton's presenting it? That's the plan. Veronica smiled, but there was no humor in it. You know the board asks detailed questions. Especially Diane Whitmore. She spent 28 years in private equity before joining our board. She can spot an inflated projection from 3 buildings away. I did know that. I'd read Diane's biography when she joined the board 2 years ago. Harvard MBA, built 2 successful venture portfolios, known for asking the questions that made CFOs sweat. Colton seems confident, I said carefully, not sure where this conversation was heading. Confidence is wonderful when it's backed by competence. Veronica leaned forward. Let me ask you something. If someone were to request the underlying assumptions in your model, the actual methodology, the sensitivity analyses, the data sources, would that documentation exist somewhere accessible? My pulse quickened. The full technical appendix is in the shared drive. It's referenced in the presentation deck, but Warren had me remove the appendix itself from the board materials. Said it was too dense, might distract from the strategic narrative. Too dense, Veronica repeated, her tone suggesting she found this reasoning absurd. How unfortunate. And if someone on the board specifically requested that appendix during the Q&A session? I met her eyes. Then Colton would need to know where to find it. And more importantly, how to explain it. The appendix includes 17 pages of methodology notes, sensitivity tables, and assumption documentation. Does he understand that methodology? Warren didn't think the details were necessary. He gave Colton the executive summary and told him to focus on the vision. Veronica finished her espresso in one swallow. Diane Whitmore loves details. She once delayed a strategic initiative for 3 months because the presenting executive couldn't explain a single line item in the pro forma financials. She's asked me to attend the board meeting as an observer, actually. Operations perspective. I'm sure it'll be educational. We parted ways with nothing explicitly agreed to, but I understood the subtext. Veronica was giving me information. What I did with it was my choice. I went back to my desk and sat there for 20 minutes, thinking. Then I opened the shared drive and looked at the folder structure. The technical appendix was filed under board_materials_Q for strategic_expansion supporting_ documentation technical_analysis_full_methodology.pdf. I moved it. Not deleted, that would be sabotage, possibly career-ending. Just reorganized. I created a new folder called archive_2024_methodology_reference and moved the technical appendix there. Anyone looking in the obvious location would find the folder empty. You'd need to know the file existed and search for it specifically to locate it. Then I went home and tried not to think about what I'd done. Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. Best case, Colton presents well, the board approves the strategy, Warren looks good, and I'm stuck in analytical support hell forever. Worst case, the presentation fails spectacularly, the board loses confidence in Galaxy's strategic planning, and my model, my work, gets associated with that failure. Middle case, something interesting happens. At 2 a.m., I got up and checked my email. Nothing. I checked the shared drive access logs, a paranoid habit I'd developed. Someone from Warren's account had accessed the presentation deck at 9:47 p.m. Colton's account had viewed it at 10:23 p.m. Neither had accessed the supporting documentation folder. I made tea and sat at my kitchen table, laptop open. I pulled up the technical appendix and read through it again, even though I'd written every word and knew it by heart. The methodology was sound. The projections were reasonable given the assumptions. But the assumptions themselves required context, market conditions, competitive dynamics, customer behavior patterns. Without that context, the 18% growth target looked aggressive. Maybe even reckless. With the context, it looked like the most probable outcome in a range of carefully modeled scenarios. The difference between those two interpretations would depend entirely on whether anyone asked the right questions. I closed my laptop and went back to bed. Tomorrow would be interesting. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in the executive conference room on the 12th floor. I wasn't invited, obviously. My calendar showed a block labeled Board Meeting Strategic Presentation with attendees listed as Warren, Colton, and 5 board members. I spent the afternoon working on routine reports, refreshing my email more often than I'd like to admit. At 2:07 p.m., I got up to refill my coffee. At 2:34 p.m., I reorganized my desk drawers. At 3:18 p.m., I gave up pretending to work and just stared at my inbox. At 4:47 p.m., my desk phone rang. Internal extension. Veronica. Jinsey, it's Veronica. Do you have a moment? My stomach flipped. Of course. The presentation didn't go as planned. I thought you'd want to know, given your work on the underlying analysis. I waited. Colton presented the strategic overview very smoothly. Good energy, clear slides, compelling narrative. Warren looked pleased. Then we got to Q&A. What happened? Diane asked about the revenue growth assumptions in Q3. Specifically, she wanted to understand the methodology behind our market expansion projections. How we'd calculated addressable market, what customer acquisition assumptions we were using, what sensitivity analysis we'd run. My hands gripped the phone. What did Colton say? He said the model was conservative and battle-tested. He explained that we'd looked at comparable market expansions in the sector and positioned ourselves in the middle of the range. Diane asked what middle of the range meant numerically. Colton said we were projecting 18% growth, which was modest compared to some competitors who'd achieved 25 to 30%. I closed my eyes. That wasn't what the model said at all. The 18% was the optimistic scenario, not the middle. Diane asked what our conservative scenario looked like. Veronica continued. Colton hesitated. Warren jumped in and said we'd stress-tested multiple scenarios and felt confident in the 18% target. Diane said that was nice, but she wanted to see the actual scenario planning. She asked Colton to pull up the technical appendix that showed the sensitivity analysis. Oh no. Colton clicked around in the shared folder for about 30 seconds while everyone watched. He couldn't find it. He said he'd pull it up after the meeting. Diane said she'd prefer to see it now, since we were discussing a strategic commitment that would require significant capital investment. What did Warren do? Warren tried to redirect. Said the details weren't essential to the strategic vision, that we could provide supplementary documentation afterward. Diane said, and I'm quoting directly here, in my experience, people who can't explain their numbers don't understand them. I winced. It got awkward. Harold Yates asked if the person who built the model was available. Warren said you were occupied with other priorities. Diane asked if your priorities were more important than answering board questions about a multimillion-dollar strategic initiative. The line went quiet for a moment. They tabled the approval vote, Veronica said. Pending additional documentation and a more detailed presentation of the analytical methodology. Diane specifically requested that the person who built the model present the findings directly to the board. My heart was pounding. When? Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. Same conference room. Warren will be there. Diane wants to understand the underlying assumptions before the board votes. She was quite insistent about it. I'll be there. Good. Oh, and Jinsey? Bring the technical appendix. The complete one. All 17 pages. Diane wants to walk through the methodology line by line. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I opened the shared drive, navigated to the archive folder, and moved the technical appendix back to its original location. Anyone checking the access logs would see that it had been moved, but they wouldn't see by whom. I'd used the restore from archive function, which didn't log individual user actions. Then I went home and prepared for the most important presentation of my career. Warren burst into my workspace at 8:15 a.m. Friday morning, 45 minutes before the board reconvened. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie crooked. He looked like he hadn't slept. Why did the board reject our plan? Not good morning. Not can we talk. Just panic, raw and undisguised. I looked up slowly from my laptop. They didn't reject it. They tabled it pending clarification. Diane Whitmore thinks our projections are garbage. She told the CEO she has concerns about analytical rigor. Do you have any idea what that does to my credibility? I've been here for 2 years building relationships with that board, and now Diane thinks I don't understand basic financial modeling. I let the silence stretch. Let him hear his own words. I need you to fix this, Warren said, leaning on my desk. The 9 a.m. meeting, you're walking them through everything. Make them understand the model is sound. Make them feel confident about the strategy. Is it? I asked quietly. Warren's face reddened. What kind of question is that? A precise one. I pulled up the original model on my screen, turned the laptop so he could see it. The projections are solid, but they're built on specific assumptions about market conditions, customer behavior, and competitive response. When you remove the technical appendix, you remove the context that explains why these numbers are reasonable. Without that context, the 18% growth target looks aggressive. Diane's not wrong to question it. So fix it. I can present the full methodology. Walk through every assumption, every data source, every sensitivity test, every risk factor we've accounted for. But that's going to take time, Warren. And some of the scenarios in the appendix show outcomes that aren't as optimistic as the executive summary suggests. The conservative case shows 12% growth. The pessimistic case shows 8%. Warren stared at me. You're saying we oversold it. I'm saying Colton presented the highlights without understanding the foundation. He positioned 18% as a conservative estimate when it's actually the optimistic scenario. The model is sound. The presentation was incomplete. His jaw worked. This is because I pulled you from the presentation. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Fine. You present at 9. But keep it positive. Don't make us look incompetent. I'll make us look thorough, I said. That's different. The board doesn't want optimism, Warren. They want competence. They want to know we've thought through the risks and have contingency plans. That's what the model provides. He ran his hand through his hair. Diane already thinks I don't understand the numbers. Then the best thing you can do is let me show her that someone on your team does. Take credit for building a team that does rigorous analysis. That's leadership. Warren looked at me for a long moment. I could see him recalculating, trying to find the angle that would salvage his reputation. Okay, he said finally. But I'm introducing you. Framing the presentation. Make sure the board knows this was my initiative, my strategic vision. Of course, I said. It is your strategy. I just built the math underneath it. He left. I checked my presentation file one more time, then headed upstairs to the conference room where my career would either transform or implode. The 12th floor conference room felt different in the morning light. Larger somehow. More formal. The oval table could seat 16, but today only 7 chairs were occupied. Diane Whitmore sat at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on her nose, a printout of the original presentation deck covered in handwritten notes. Warren sat to her left, hands clasped, looking like a man awaiting judgment. Harold Yates and Margaret Sullivan flanked the other side. Veronica observed from a chair along the wall, expression carefully neutral. The CEO, Olivia Brenner, sat at the far end, watching everything. I set up my laptop at the presentation console, connected to the room's display system. My hands were steady. I'd learned a long time ago that nervousness and excitement feel identical physiologically, it's just a question of interpretation. Ms. Roman, Diane began, thank you for joining us on short notice. I understand you developed the financial model underlying yesterday's strategic proposal. Yes, ma'am. I spent approximately 3 months building and testing the model. Walk me through your methodology. Specifically, I want to understand how you calculated the 18% revenue growth projection for Q3 and Q4. I opened my laptop, pulled up the technical appendix on the main screen, and began. The projection starts with addressable market sizing. I analyzed 3 independent market research reports, one from Forrester, one from Gartner, and one from IDC. They estimated the mid-market enterprise software segment at between $42 and $53 billion annually. I used the conservative figure, $42 billion, as our baseline. I clicked to the next slide, showing the data sources and calculations. Next, I looked at Galaxy's current market share in the enterprise segment, which is approximately 0.8%. For the mid-market expansion, I assumed we'd start with lower market penetration, 0.2% in the first quarter, scaling to 0.4% by Q4. That gave us a target customer base of roughly 800 to 1,600 new accounts. Diane made a note. What's your assumption for customer acquisition cost? Based on our historical data from the enterprise segment, adjusted for the lower contract values in mid-market, I estimated a customer acquisition cost of $12,000 per account. That includes sales, marketing, and implementation costs. Show me the historical data you used. I pulled up a table showing 3 years of CAC trends across different customer segments. You can see here that enterprise CAC has ranged from $18,000 to $23,000 over the past 3 years. Mid-market customers typically have lower touchpoint requirements, shorter sales cycles, and smaller implementation teams, so I applied a 40 to 45% reduction to arrive at the $12,000 figure. Harold Yates leaned forward. What about churn? Mid-market customers typically have higher churn rates than enterprise. Absolutely correct. I clicked to the next section. Our enterprise segment shows annual churn of approximately 8%. For mid-market, I assumed 15% annual churn in the base case, with a range of 12 to 18% depending on our customer success execution. I walked them through the next 20 slides, explaining every assumption in detail. Customer lifetime value calculations based on average contract size and retention patterns. Sensitivity analysis showing how the revenue projections would shift if any single assumption changed. Scenario planning that showed outcomes ranging from 8% growth in the pessimistic case to 23% in the aggressive case. This 18% figure that was presented yesterday, where does that fall in your scenario planning? Diane asked. It's the optimistic scenario, I said clearly. Not unrealistic, but it assumes favorable market conditions and strong execution across all functions. The most probable outcome, given historical patterns and current market dynamics, is around 14% growth. Warren shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Why wasn't this nuance communicated yesterday? Diane asked, looking at Warren. I jumped in before Warren could answer. The executive summary focused on the target we believed was achievable with strong execution. In strategic planning, there's always tension between presenting an inspiring vision and presenting a conservative forecast. The full model provides both perspectives. Diane studied me. Which perspective should the board use for capital allocation decisions? The conservative one, I said without hesitation. Budget for 14% growth, plan for 12%, and if we achieve 18%, that's upside. The model shows we can generate solid returns even in the 12% scenario, which suggests the strategy is robust. For the next 20 minutes, Diane asked increasingly detailed questions. I answered each one, referencing specific cells in the model, acknowledging where I'd made judgment calls versus using hard data, explaining the assumptions I was most and least confident about. This is significantly more nuanced than yesterday's presentation suggested, Diane said finally. The executive summary highlighted the most probable scenario, I replied carefully. But probability isn't certainty. The model includes multiple pathways because the future is inherently uncertain. Good strategy accounts for that uncertainty. Why wasn't this level of detail presented initially? I glanced at Warren. This was dangerous territory. That was a strategic decision about information density and audience engagement. Sometimes there's value in presenting a clear vision before diving into complexity. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. A poor decision, in my view. This analysis is exactly what the board needs to evaluate risk appropriately. Mr. Ashby, why was Ms. Roman not presenting this material yesterday? Warren cleared his throat. We felt Colton could communicate the strategic vision more effectively to the board. He has strong presentation skills. More effectively than the person who built the analysis and clearly understands every assumption underlying it. Silence filled the conference room. Ms. Roman, Diane continued, turning back to me, in your professional opinion, given all the scenarios you've modeled, are these growth targets achievable? I chose my words carefully. Under the right conditions, yes. We need to execute flawlessly on customer retention, and the market needs to cooperate with our timing. But the model accounts for downside scenarios. Even in the conservative case, 12% growth, we see acceptable returns on invested capital. That's what gives me confidence in the strategy. It's not that we can't fail, it's that we can succeed even if conditions are moderately unfavorable. Diane made a final note. This is what I needed to see. The board will vote this afternoon. Ms. Roman, you'll receive an invitation to present at future board meetings. Directly. Warren's face went white. The board approved the strategic plan that afternoon with modifications. They authorized the mid-market expansion but adjusted the budget to reflect the 14% growth scenario rather than the 18% target. Responsible allocation based on realistic projections, exactly what good governance looks like. Warren avoided me for 3 days. I'd see him in the hallway and he'd suddenly need to check his phone. I'd enter a conference room for a meeting and he'd be intensely focused on his laptop. The office gossip network was buzzing, everyone knew something had happened at the board meeting, but the details were murky. On Monday, I got a calendar invitation from Olivia Brenner, the CEO. 30-minute meeting, no agenda listed. I arrived at her office at exactly 2 p.m. Olivia's office was on the 14th floor, corner view, decorated with minimalist furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than my car. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Diane spoke highly of your presentation, Olivia said without preamble. She said it was the most thorough financial analysis she's seen from our strategy team in the 2 years she's been on our board. I'm glad it was helpful, I said. Helpful? Olivia smiled. She thinks you're wasted in your current role. So do I. For years here, stellar reviews, major projects, revenue saved. You rebuilt our retention model, caught a multi-million-dollar pricing error. You're the analyst everyone wants. My pulse quickened. I enjoy the work. I can tell. But you're ready for more. We're creating a new position, Director of Strategic Analysis. You'd report directly to me, oversee analysts, attend board meetings, and present financial models yourself. Interested? Very, I said, smiling. Good. 40% salary increase plus equity. Warren stays VP of Strategy, but he'll coordinate with you. All board proposals need your analytical sign-off. Can you handle that? Could I work with someone who'd tried to sideline me, and failed? Absolutely. Personal dynamics are secondary to quality work, I said. Olivia studied me. That's why you're right for this. You kept your professionalism even when others didn't. Walking back to my desk, the title echoed in my head, Director of Strategic Analysis. Not just a promotion, but proof that precision mattered. For years, I'd been told to soften my tone, to focus less on data and more on charm. Yet here I was, recognized not for politics, but for clarity. The numbers had spoken when words couldn't. That week, congratulations poured in from across the company. Warren stayed silent until our first meeting. So, he said tightly, everything goes through you now? Yes. I handle the analytical foundation. You handle strategy. Complementary skill sets. You embarrassed me in front of the board. No, I replied evenly. You embarrassed yourself by skipping the data. I just made sure the facts were visible. We established a truce, he'd lead vision, I'd ensure accuracy. It wasn't friendship, but it worked. Later, Veronica invited me to coffee. You've settled in well, she said. You helped make that happen. True, she admitted. Warren needed humbling. You were the right person to reveal his blind spot. And Galaxy needed your kind of rigor. I smiled. So I was a convenient weapon. Maybe, she said. But a necessary one. In corporate life, good work matters, but visibility matters more. You were excellent. I just made sure the right people noticed. As she left, she added, one more thing, Warren won't forget. Watch your back. I already was.